and geopolitics, history, spirituality, money, finance, world news, science, technology, conspiracies. Let's talk. Tish Talk.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tish Talk. Sorry, we were a few minutes late getting the live stream going, but this should be an amazing deep dive with my friend and someone who's really taught me a lot over the last few years, Matthew Ehret. And I'm so pleased that I've gotten to know him and his lovely wife in the last few years as I've been pursuing my own political path to help our country. But Matthew, for those of you who don't know him yet, you should. He is an incredibly prolific author of so many incredible books, including The Untold History of Canada, Clash of Two Americas, and I think recently, and there's a lot more, but Revenge of the Mystery Cults. And this guy has an exceptional memory. He understands history going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So he's really helpful in educating us about the deep state pillars, not just in Canada, but around the world, and the so-called great game that's had different forces, good and evil, fighting each other. He's also the chief editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review and the co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation. So you can follow him there and support his work. Anyways, welcome, Matthew. How are you today?
I'm good, Tish. Always a pleasure to chat with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
You know what? So am I. And I know everyone doesn't want to hear me. They want to you, so I'll have to get my 2 cents in as just because we're so excited, so many of us who've been aware of what's been going on, looking south almost jealously at our US friend and the incredible things that have happened since Trump took office. And his executive orders are so powerful. A lot of them, even common sense things like there's only 2 sexes, male and female, keeping biological men out of women's sports. There's been so much harm there. All of his stances on the border. He even recently stopped funding for any school that still mandates the COVID shot. Ending the indoctrination, stopping DEI, protecting the border, exiting the WHO, exiting the Paris Accord. The list is so extensive, and those of us, particularly people who've supported the PPC, are drooling, really. We'd be so nice to have that in Canada. But instead, we have people screaming at Trump over tariffs when April 1st, we have an increase in the fake carbon tax that almost no one else in the world pays. We have all of these horrific things going on in our own country. The wasteful spending that's been uncovered recently with US aid is just grotesque. And I think Canadians should be up in arm in our own incredibly wasteful spending through global affairs. But this is really not coming out in the media. So give us, just to start, what's your take on the first month of Trump in office?
Yeah. Well, I think they're, like you've just outlined in a very thorough thumbnail sketch, a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And there's certainly a lot more to work with for patriots who actually care about the human species, with Trump doing what he's doing as a very positively disruptive factor in world affairs than there would have been had there have been a continuation of the sort of neoliberal, neocon convergence of globalism that had been the trend for the past 40 or so years of globalization. So that's good. That should create, it does create a space to have conversations that couldn't otherwise be had amongst Canadians, thinking about the deep future and like what will be the life that our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren live in, faced as we are with the inevitable fact, which I've been writing about for a number of years, but this is not just me. This is like anybody looking at the simple evidence of the unavoidable systemic economic collapse that's baked into, almost by design, the very fabric of the Western transatlantic neoliberal model that was really established in 1971 with the conscious detachment of the US dollar from the fixed exchange rate system, the floating of the dollar as they called it, and thus the new paradigm of consumerism that replaced the idea of a society founded upon production, where consumerism was validated by always having an increase of the productive powers of labor that had been like the only basis upon which human, like Western civilization, had viability, was that we self-identified both as individuals living within society, but also as nations, around the idea that we must always produce and increase the powers of production by the encouragement of new discoveries and the transformation of said discoveries into new forms of technologies that could increase our ability to sustain more people at a higher quality of life. And that power, that belief in progress, was the vitality, the lifeblood that gave us moral fiber and the ability to sort of resist imperial agendas that sought always to impose, pseudo-scientific doctrines like eugenics, the science of the racial purification of the species by a hereditarily more Ubermenschen fit part of that species, which caused so much destruction and damage to human civilization for centuries. So that ability to oppose that was founded upon that moral fabric that was associated, in my mind, very concretely with the idea of our ability to always self-perfect, to increase progress, to overcome the limits to growth, to break free of the Malthusian, the Malthusian constraints to our limits. That only can happen, unlike with other animals. Other animals have constraints just like we do. The world is only so big. There's only so much arable land and water. However, the other animals of the biosphere are limited by the fact that they have to adapt to those limits. Human beings alone can discover ideas of the future, discover cycles that result in a foreseeable drought, which allows us to make decisions now in the present to allocate a portion of our bounty towards mitigating the effects of that destruction when the drought season does happen. That's even lessons that we find in the Old Testament for all things. So we can improve upon those things by discovering water irrigation, water diversion projects, desalination. We can do beautiful, amazingly good things when we're actualizing these powers. The oligarchy wants us to lose touch with that quality of the human species, of our own nature, that allows us to solve problems. And instead, the oligarchy wants us to adapt to systems of techno-feudalism. Instead,
absolutely. And we see this now when we're being shown where our taxpayer dollars all over Western nations. I was listening to a podcast with a couple of people from Britain, and it's the same, whether it's US aid or UK aid or global affairs. Our money is being extracted from us, and and most people say it's being laundered under the guise of these so-called radical ideologies. One of them was global circumcisions, or a gay LGBTQ opera house in some remote area that may or may not even exist. I mean, the level of infiltration with Soros.
Yeah, there's like a Paraguayan LGBT comic book that received like a 30,000 grant from USAID. Like, why are we doing that?
If you look at the list, it should get you mad. I mean, we allowed these techno billionaires to censor dissenting voices, keep information from us, and all of these oligarchs and and feudalists like Open Society Foundation have extracted that money and funded both terrorism and the whole drug cartel. I mean, this is all coming out. And another good thing Trump has done, even in recent weeks, although some people aren't certain, but it could be quite good, is to promote peace in the Middle East, as well as peace with Russia, Ukraine. And Pete Hegseth has said no more American soldiers going to Ukraine, and NATO. Ukraine will never be part of NATO. I mean, these are really significant and massive historical steps, all happening at, dare I say, warp speed in the first month of his presidency. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, the difficulty for me, Tish, is that my focus and purpose in life is to awaken problem-solving capabilities, right? So I find that there are two problematic modes of thinking amongst those human beings, and I say the word with a capital H, like real human beings who want to have a future, who despise oligarchy, which is on the one hand, there's these extremes. And many of those people who read my material and follow me on social media and other things. So one extreme tends to see Trump as a messiah-esque figure. The other extreme tends to see him as an anti-Christ figure.
Yeah.
And I think both are almost equally destructive.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And he's said himself many times, he's certainly playing a historical role right now at a time of, massive evil.
Yeah.
But he's one man who's surrounded obviously by other exceptionally good people.
Yeah. And also exceptionally bad people. So the thing is, I think that we have to acknowledge the evil, which is also trying to co-opt and direct the force, the momentum around Trump towards bad ends. And it doesn't do patriots, I don't think, a service to ignore it or to try to paint it away. It is a real thing, which is the transhumanist, billionaire technocratic elitists, represented by such very untrustworthy, I would say, satanic figures like Peter Thiel, who believes that we have to merge with machines in order to stay relevant, and transcend democratic institutions.
Absolutely. This is a big issue. Even with Sam Altman and that that whole thing with Trump, a lot of people
Elon Musk is like the most rich man in the world, and as such, when I look at his evolution, I don't trust Elon. I think he's an ideologically committed transhumanist who is also committed to the idea that human beings have to purge themselves of their humanity to merge with machinery and Neuralinks and mRNA technologies that he's, like even vaccines that he's generating within his Tesla companies in Germany, to improve the human species from what it currently is. So I think you've got this very satanic, dangerous cult within Silicon Valley, which is theosophical in its essence, and the Theosophists were seeded in the 19th century. For those who may not know, the Theosophists were a new sort of movement created by the followers of Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, as a new syncretic global religious order that was later led by Charles Leadbeater, the rampant pedophile, and Annie Besant, the Fabian Society heiress and ISIS priestess, who also had deep penetration in the creation of the Nazi war machine through the Thule Society and other things. They did the same thing in the United States. And the entire idea of Madame Blavatsky was that a new human species could be evolved by the superior fifth root race of Teutonic Aryans that would generate the new transhuman order of the sixth root race that she foresaw as emerging out of Silicon Valley. And she was writing this back in the 1880s.
I think I really believe we've turned a corner away from that. And I just watched the documentary about Joel Salatin. I mean, he's been like one of my favorites as someone who loves organic food and regenerative farming. And The Lunatic Farmer, I think everyone could watch it. I know it's available Angel Studios, but it's just the idea of what he was up against to have a farm, like a homestead in the 70s and 80s. And then through his, he has such a deep faith in God and God's abundance and the natural way that you don't need these contained feedlots, and you don't need all these, the way that we are running the earth is satanic. I mean, everything we're doing, but when you actually step into the way God wants you to run it, there's just natural abundance. He was showing how even all these ancient grasses are growing now on his property because he's aligned with God. I mean, the reason I say this is because I think the tide is turning towards living in harmony with God's will all over. I mean, the increase in the number of people who want a homestead, just even since COVID, the number of people who aren't buying that quaxines are saving us. It's just huge. I mean, relative to the world population. I mean, Canada is so incredibly sleepy, and we can talk about that. But I think a lot of these things that are being shown to us also are now being shown in a different light. People are attacking Sam Altman. I don't think that's going to work out with what Trump is doing. And some people say he shows people who are very corrupt so that we can pick them apart. I don't know if that's true, but the transhumanist thing is very disturbing. But I personally believe, I don't want your opinion, that it's coming unhinged. And what we're really called to do is step into our humanity, which I believe has been missing. If you look at the way people treat each other, I mean, just talking basics, I mean, the Karens, the rudeness, the fighting, the ego, I mean, really the other direction away from this transhumanism is actually becoming truly human, saying, sorry, I fucked up. I mean, taking responsibility, caring for your community. And that's where I hope we're waking up to go in that direction. Your thoughts?
No, I agree. No, and I think that there's a variety. That's where I was saying that I think the two extremes of people who interpret what's happening right now, between the extreme view that Trump is a Messiah-like versus an Antichrist-like figure as extremes, are both not conducive to constructive thinking. And I think where I'm at right now in my analysis, and my jury is still out. I'm waiting. We're what, 4 weeks into barely 4 weeks into Trump's second term. I need more data. I need more information. So far, what I'm seeing gives me a lot of reason to be optimistic. As you pointed out, here, let's just recap that, okay, one more time, just to really
you want me to? Okay, I'll go through. Yeah, for people joining later. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just run through it. So from based on some of your considerations, the shutdown or the exit of the USA from WHO, which is creating a reverberation amongst many countries who are all of a sudden having discussions that they would not otherwise have been able to have around the idea of them exiting WHO, the World Health Organization. We see that in India, discussions around that.
Italy and Argentina too.
Italy and Argentina are both now having serious discussions in their parliaments around, well, if the USA can do it, why cannot we do it as well? The same thing for the Paris Accords, the idea of creating climate carbon reduction policies to ultimately kill human beings, which is the euphemism behind sustainable development, which is always ways to reduce the human population levels to acceptable levels for the elite of maybe 1 or 2 billion, says our computer models, right? I'm speaking euphemistically, but that's really what the sustainable development idea has always been around the Green New Deal and the Paris Climate Accords. So exiting that, great. the idea of shutting down the vast majority of U.S. aid. Good. Damn
Huge.
good.
Massive. This
yeah,
is so
so good.
massive because the drug traffickers, they were saving even money to Afghanistan.
Yes.
You know, that
Yes.
really, it's
Yes.
huge.
Absolutely. Freezing. Last time I read this a week ago, he had frozen, and I believe it's still frozen, National Endowment for Democracy funding. The first term in office, again, informs me a lot. So I get attacked a lot because I tend to look for a positive interpretation of Trump on the global scene, and a lot of people who I get it, right? I get it. They have looked at the evil of the oligarchy quite a lot, and they are very cynical about the idea of how it be possible that somebody could attain political power at this late stage of imperial rot, such that these things could happen. They have doubts. I respect that, but I a lot of my decision making and my assessment comes from my close examination of Trump throughout his first 4 years as the president, as well as my deeper evaluation of what he said and did since the 1980s publicly about what he would do should he attain political power. And these are not to be ignored. You know, like he did things like the shutdown of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, according to Stephen Harper and Barack Obama and then Justin Trudeau, was going to happen. It was known as the NAFTA of the Pacific, which was essentially the idea that you would give private corporations more power than sovereign nation states within, and also isolate all of China's neighbors from having any legal ability to carry out economic collaboration with China, which was what the TPP was all about, at the same time that it would give corporations the power to sue sovereign nations that would try to impose a protective tariff, which was what NAFTA also did. It allowed nations like, let's say, Canada, what we saw with Chrystia Freeland in 2018, when Trump first announced that he was going to challenge NAFTA and introduce the right to impose a protective tariff. That's the unique power of a sovereign nation state. What did she do? Chrystia Freeland, at the time she was the finance minister, she went to the World Trade Organization and sued the United States. Who the hell can do that? What? That should not be a right of anybody to do that. But she's acting on behalf of private interests that want to disrupt the sovereign national power to rein them in, which was why the Bilderberger Group was founded in the first place back in 1956. The Bilderberger Group, I think for anybody listening, they should know. If they don't know, they should know, was one of the dominant and is one of the dominant power structures in the world today, set up by people like Prince Bernhard, unreconstructed Nazi SS member, who was the closest friend of Prince Philip Mountbatten. And together, these two individuals, I mean, they not only created this globalist organization that would serve to reorganize private interests from 1956 onward around an idea of a consortium to create a stripping of a castration, I should even say, of sovereign nation states through deregulation, assassination, military destabilization, as we did with Chile's Pinochet and so many other nations, JFK and Bobby Kennedy just being two individuals who were killed by this force, that would then result in subduing nations to this private consortium that would then be organized around a subsidiary of the Bilderberger Group set up in 1971, known as the World Economic Forum. That's why it was created at the same year and the same month that the US dollar was floated from the fixed exchange rate system and the gold reserve standard that allowed for same year.
Wow.
Yeah, that was
71?
all part of this 1971.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
In January 1971 was the foundation of the World Economic Forum. And that was the same month that Zbigniew Brzezinski published his manifesto for the Trilateral Commission that David Rockefeller, Kissinger, and Zbigniew had created around his Between Two Ages, America and the Technotronic Age. That was 1971.
Big year.
Big year. The Inter-Alpha Group under Jacob Rothschild, from who had a controlling stake in the Bank of Scotland. The Royal Bank of Scotland was set up around the idea of controlling and coordinating the private banking functions of Banco Santander later on, and a variety of these major private central banks under the Inter Alpha Group, also 1971, and that was the same period that the dollar was floated, that allowed for the U.S. takeover by this private financier elite to accelerate massively, again over the dead bodies of people like Bobby Kennedy, Fred Hampton, John F. Kennedy earlier, and Martin Luther King Jr. So that was 1971, like you said, big year. Bilderberger Group, that was the idea, was to convince stupid people in the West, including in Canada, to say that we don't need to utilize our Bank of Canada. We have to just submit to the Bank of International Settlements and these globalist institutions to ultimately deregulate national systems that had kept these private interests under control. So we did that. And Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman were given Nobel Prize to legitimize these destructive ideas of the Austrian school and other things that allowed for us to do what we did under Reaganomics and Thatcherism. And then Mulrooney did it when he said, Canada should just be sold off, which is what happened. But at that time, when he said that in 1987, that was after we signed our free trade agreement with the United States. We were setting up shop for NAFTA to become affected in 1992. But by then, the U.S. had been colonized by its enemies through the operations of the private sector. So it had been sufficiently colonized that then, once that was done, then Canada could say, okay, let's remove our anti-American regulation now, and we'll allow for Canada to be bought up by those interests that just killed JFK and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. So it wasn't America as we knew it anymore. It was this Bilderberger Group, private corporatist fascism that had ran a coup, and then from there co-opted and took more and more controls from 1992 to the present of Canada. So this is what Trump resisted when he came in. He said we have to overthrow the NAFTA Accords, which is what he did, which is good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to.
Sorry, no, this is confusing. I have to ask a couple questions because the audience might be wondering as well. Now we know Stephen Harper now is involved with the Bilderberger Group, so I just wanted you to confirm that and what his role is. But people, it is confusing because right now Canada is suffering from a lot of over-regulation. So regulations have become so burdensome, we can't even do proper interprovincial trade. So there's a real negative aspect of these bureaucratic over-regulation designed to stifle that free trade within our country. And even stop, innovation and entrepreneurship and, things like that. So I also want you to clarify some of those things around some of the negative aspects where deregulation has been also equally harmful. And that's a really important point because, like you say, a lot of times on a lot of issues, it's not one or the other, right? It's not either Trump's a good guy or a bad guy. I'm a Trump fan. I think he's a good person who's done a lot of good. He is just a person. But with regards to things like regulation, it's not rip it all away and then, private sectors can come and rape and pillage us. That's what a globalist wet dream, right? We have to have proper regulation that protects our Canadian assets, but also then a level of deregulation within the areas that are, stifling innovation. So if you could just clarify that would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to intention. So in a culture which is fit to survive, there's always there's this Bible verse that goes, without a vision, the people perish. Without a vision, the people perish. And I think that's that touches upon a quality of natural law that gets at an answer to the question that you just threw out there, which is that any society fit to survive is always looking towards the future with objectively true intentions to meet challenges and overcome them. It'll never be perfect, and we can never forecast what exactly the solutions to those challenges will look like. But a society fit to survive always has that attribute about it. Now, the people need to also yearn for that too, right? For a democracy to work, you can't have a bunch of people who are corrupted and induced to egotistical selfishness. They have to be a society, a culture that generally recognizes that their personal liberties are associated with their responsibilities, and that their responsibilities pertain to their engagement with the society that they're part of, much like what you're doing as a citizen activist. That should be like a normal thing. That shouldn't be, you should not be an abnormal exception to the rule as you are currently today. You should be an expression of like the natural order of things.
Yeah, well, I tell you, there's not a lot of people who step in my shoes because I'm a strong woman.
Yeah.
I think my training as a black belt has saved me, but I get the trolls from the CPC. I get the trolls from the Lib NDP, although I get the trolls even from the freedom movement, because they're more inclined to sort of the anarchy or giving up. I call it being black pilled, because if you decide that you want to give up, or it's not worth it, or Canada's screwed, you're just buying into this dystopic vision that you've talked about many times, that a lot of these authors who've been part of this oligarchy want to present to us, the 1984 dystopia. And I think it's up to us to do the hard work to say, no, I'm not buying into that vision. I'm going to create a vision of Canada being an economic powerhouse, of being a place of sovereignty, freedom, and health. And that's simple to say, but it's going to take a lot of hard work. And I mean, as an example, the action step is I presented maybe, I'm not sure if it's 10, I like to be accurate, but 9 or 10 times to council. And when you go to a local council, you see the level of indoctrination. And so you talk about being like fit to survive, but people are literally running off a cliff in most areas. And so I don't know, we've got to be able to go in masses to stop this mass destruction of humanity. They're virtue signaling things like sun equity in a presentation, they call it harmful carcinogenic UV rays. And so this is a long presentation by someone at a council meeting I presented at that went before me. And the solution is shade equity, and things like educating people on uses of sunscreen, particularly for little babies. Now, if anyone's Googled the number of class action lawsuits against these toxic sunscreen companies, again, the solution is often a poison that's far more harmful than the problem. And again, we're weaponizing things like carbon and sunshine, while we line up for experimental injections and eat toxic food and put fluoride in our water still, after evidence has shown it lowers IQ and can harm fetuses. So it's a really massive issue. And I think our biggest issue, Canada may be one of the worst, is the level of whatever you want to call it, the mind virus, the indoctrination, the brainwashing, the hijacking of the hippocampus. I know Dr. Nels talked about it. Can you comment on that aspect of what we're dealing with in Western countries, but particularly Canada?
Yeah, I mean, you've said a lot there. You said a lot there. Look, I think that we're now several generations in. The way I'm going to approach, there's so many directions I could take when approaching what you just said. As far as sharing my considerations are concerned, we are several generations into a post-industrial consumer society time bomb that was designed to explode. That's why what was done in 1971 was to introduce a normalized mode of thinking, which was in fact a time bomb masquerading as legitimate thinking about economics that as a time bomb was designed to bubble up, grow, expand, and bust. That's why it was created, ideally with a detonation mechanism within it. Similar in some manner to what we had seen in the 1920s with the introduction of a sick mind virus in the form of the idea that nation states must, to be wealthy, deregulate, open up to the speculative free markets so that innovation could maximize. But as an effect, that was just simply the Trojan horse logic to sell it to people. But the intention, that's why I said intention is everything. The intention was always to get fools to acquiesce, to deregulate their society, to shut down national sovereign controls and influence over the private banking sector, which resulted in a period of elusive and illusory is the word, and also elusive, profit, which came to be known today. We call it the Roaring Twenties. People made money with money. They gambled with people's savings, and broker call loans grew and grew to the point that it outnumbered the overall GDP by a factor of 5.9% or even 6% between 1925 to 1929. And when the bubble was was ripe and expanded sufficiently, a decision was made by those who coordinated this entire deregulation in the form of those handlers of Andrew Carnegie. Sorry, not Andrew. Yeah, well, he was dead then, but no, Andrew Mellon, I should say, who was the finance, the Treasury Secretary under Coolidge and Hoover, who oversaw this deregulation. Andrew Mellon was a part of the old families, the old nobility that ran as an aristocracy in the United States. They who were in the know were able to sell short and prepare for the biggest wealth transfer at that point ever seen before, which they did when all of the broker call loans were called in simultaneously in a certain day in 1929. And when it was revealed, as they knew it was going to be revealed, that the brokers who were gambling with other people's money, it was a whole culture of brokers, much like not that different from the way NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange functions in our present days. It was known that they wouldn't have the money to pay back their loans that they took out as brokers to carry out their speculative acts. They defaulted, and the foreseeable default was chain reactionary, and it resulted in a total blowout of the economy. So only those who knew benefited in some way. Those who were not part of the preferred clients lists of JP Morgan's lost everything. And a deep depression was begun, which broke psycho-spiritually the vast majority of Canadians and Americans and Europeans living in the world that suffered supply chain breakdowns. There was physical death by starvation in the thousands in North America, something we would today think was unheard of, but that's what happened.
Well, absolutely. My father grew up in the Depression. A lot of people my age grew up in the Depression, and they have stories. My dad, if they didn't have a garden, they called it a victory garden. If they didn't have a garden, they didn't store it properly in the winter, they wouldn't really have enough food. It was that bad. Yeah. And I think this whole sense of frugality came from the people who lived through those times, waste not, want not, and saving. And it sort of permeated the culture of a lot of the children, the people and the children. And it had a profound effect on us. And, this played out again. But some people might not be aware of how Glass-Steagall was implemented in Canada that had protective measures. So, protectionism is actually quite useful when done with the right interests. And so there was this laid out. If you could explain that to people who might not be aware of Glass-Steagall and how that actually helped to benefit and protect the Canadian banking industry for a time.
Yeah, sure. And for anybody listening right now who might be confused, this is absolutely important strategic relevance for our current fight at the
Yes.
moment. Whether or not we become part of the United States, or whether we become an independent country, or whether we die, is going to be affected by whether we can answer this question or not, which is, can we assert the power of the sovereign nation state over private finance or not, as we had done successfully in the 1930s and 40s, which involved, as you said, in the case of the United States, in which had to happen there first, because Canada was not, and it still is not, but then also was not sovereign enough to do this ourselves. It had to first come from a country that bled for freedom, which the United States had done in 1776. So what we found with their constitutional form of government, it gave a power to the executive branch of representatives of the people to carry out an immense amount of power,
Reform.
of massive reform, and of the very corrupt private banking system that had done what it had done, what I just alluded to, during the great, leading up to and causing the Great Depression and the wealth transfer, as well as the financing of Hitler's Nazi machinery, of Mussolini's corporatism, which would not have been successful had it not been receiving vast funding from Prescott Bush, JP Morgan, Rockefeller, all of these Western banking cartels. Had they not received that support, they would not have been effective. They would have petered out. They did not represent the majority will of the people of Italy or of Germany in the times that they came to power. So it was only through a massive influx artificially, which of money from City of London Wall Street cartels, that this was even possible. So that was their solution in Canada and the United States. In the case of the US, because you had, fortunately, a major battle and it was a fight. I actually, in 2008, this was part of my own intellectual development, as a side note, an aside between you and me right now. I was invited to participate in the creation of a documentary in 2008, and it was called 1932: Speak Not of Parties, but of Universal Principles. And I was the artistic director of that documentary. And it was a really important learning experience for me, because I did not at that time understand very much about the Depression or Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, or what allowed even the person of Franklin Roosevelt to come to power against all odds as the dark horse candidate in 1932, when he won and then was installed in 1933 as the president. I didn't understand any of that. I still had thought, honestly, that FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, was a bad guy.
Yeah, people who are listening, your assessment of him is actually extremely good overall.
Thank you. And that was what I thought as well. I drank a lot of the Kool-Aid, and there are a lot of the popular narratives that had been promulgated over decades about him as a Rothschild tool of empire. And so I had no positive feelings. So when I was asked to be a part of this team to put together this documentary, because I had certain artistic skills, I was weary. I had a lot of trepidation, and I said, I have to do more research before I agree to this. And I began to do that work. And in the course of that time, I realized joyously that I was wrong. And in fact, there were largely two dominant efforts already from 1932 and into the World War II by this Anglo-American private banking oligarchy that wished and attempted to create a new world order of a one world government founded upon a eugenics religion. And I don't say science, I say religion, because it was a devoted religion by the elite, the self-professed elite of high-bred families that saw themselves as more than human, and which sought to find a pseudo-scientific excuse to kill off the excess useless eaters. And so the only reason why their efforts at a one world government under a London banking cartel in 1933 failed, as well as their second effort when they regrouped and tried again failed, was because of the particular intervention of Franklin Roosevelt, which was punctuated by his first pulling out the U.S. delegations from any involvement from the London Economic and Monetary Conference of 1932-33. That was an attempt to create under the Bank of International Settlements and the Bank of England and the League of Nations, this trifecta of a global governance structure to solve the Great Depression. He consciously called for all of the U.S. delegates to pull out, which torpedoed and sabotaged the conference. Thank God. I didn't even know about that till I looked into the facts, and it's true.
And he created Glass-Steagall Act in 1933, which is simultaneously so significant. Yes.
Yeah. So as he was doing this on the international level, he was also waging a battle against the domestic controls of the Wall Street banks that involved his Pecora Commission, the forced auditing of all of these Wall Street banks, the pulling of J.P. Morgan and many hundreds of other leading central bankers into court to force them to admit how they manipulated the U.S. economy and the world economy for decades leading up to the Depression. He forced that. And then he forced them to, through Ferdinand Pecora and the Pecora Commissions, which he gave amazing power to audit the banks. He forced them to admit that they actually lied and stole other people's money to gamble, much as we did leading up to the housing market bubble of the 2007-2008 period that was never resolved. So people took, so he forced that. He forced the media to cover that. He survived 2 assassination attempts by these same financial interests that were sponsoring Hitler and Mussolini at that same time. And because of what he was able to expose through the Pecora Commission, he was able to then, by March, sign a series of acts, one of which involved the installation of what's called the Glass-Steagall Act that you alluded to, which broke up the banks. It forced an absolute separation between clean, necessary commercial banking, the types of which you would want to have in any type of viable society. You want to have banks, but the banks have to be a servant to the people. And so to do that, what he did is he forced them to be broken up, where the banks were able to and the assets associated with farming, industrial output, people's personal equity that would be associated with personal loans that would be tied to commercial activity, that was protected under the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So for the very first time, a government insurance of a certain, and this was done in Canada, which was needed to regain confidence in the banking system that had failed so many people. They had no confidence in the US dollar or the banks per se. So to authentically regain confidence required putting bankers in jail, which he did. It required regulating the banks, breaking them up, which he did. It required giving people a guarantee that for the first time their deposits would be secured with government insurance up to $100,000 in the United States, which he did. This was similar.
And separating the speculative investment banking
and made it illegal. And made it illegal for gamblers to gamble with people's savings, which he did under the Glass-Steagall. And that created the foundation upon which the banking holiday was carried out, that reorganized and figured out which of those 5,000 or 6,000 small banks. Back then, there weren't so many too big to fail banks as there are today, but there were more private small banks. But many of them got enmeshed in this speculative game of making money with nothing of the 20s. So what he did with the bank holidays, he said, we're gonna shut them all down for 2 weeks. We'll audit them. We'll see who is soluble, who actually has assets that could be reorganized under new management. People would be fired to begin to rehabilitate the real economy. And about 75% of those banks that were declared that had to close were opened again for business under new management and new behavior. The 25% were totally insoluble. They were shut down forever. But 75% were open and became the driving force under FDR tried also to get a national bank. It was called the National Credit Banks. He introduced legislation. It was shut down at the time in 1933. So because his national credit bank system, which was essentially a revival of the greenback system of Lincoln, it didn't work. It would have been the best, but it didn't work. So what he had to do as second best was he co-opted the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. I'm saying all this because I want people who are listening to think about how these lessons apply to today's Canada.
Yeah,
right?
And I'm going to fast track you because I know there's so much history in between, but let's move to why Glass-Steagall was removed and why no one was held accountable during 2007-8. So then we can move back to our financial crisis today without losing too much time. And
and let me ask you this right now: how much time do we still have left before we have to end?
There's no set time. I mean, we've got a good group listening in, and I'm sure they're enjoying this. So settle in, everyone, with a cup of tea or something stronger. But yeah, there's a lot of topics to cover. I want to tackle the topic of tariffs with you too, because there's a lot of confusion. So let's make this, let's give it another 5-10 minutes on this, and I'm going to move to tariffs.
Good. All right. So what I'll wrap up is that in Canada, it was not called Glass-Steagall. It was called the Four Pillars. And that happened around the end of World War II. We finally got our act together, and we realized that we also needed to do something similar. And so the Four Pillars became known, and that was done under William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was a confused but well-intended prime minister who should not be whose efforts should not be discarded or embraced as heroic. He had a lot of advisors at different times for good and for very bad, who he was malleable and influenced by. So one of these, it's typical. It's part of.
But this was a good thing he did.
This was undeniably a good thing.
Yeah, let's focus on that.
Yeah, because all of his good advisors were murdered in 1940 to 41, and that's a side note. So this good thing he did. Well, first, he nationalized the Bank of Canada. So it was set up in 1934 as a private central bank, modeled on the Bank of England, which would have given London total controls over the destiny of Canada. And that was done under this guy named R.B. Bennett. R.B. Bennett was very closely aligned to the Milner Rhodes Roundtable Trust Group, and he retired after he was no longer prime minister in England, where he became a barrister and viscount and lived out his days. He was always a devoted lover of the British Empire. That was his identity. So, but he did this thing to give Britain more power over Canada, and then through a fight in 1937, when William Lyon Mackenzie King had become installed, he had some good advisors, especially O.D. Skelton, his Minister of External Affairs, who had been a leading advisor and friend of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, our earlier prime minister, who was ousted by the Round Table in 1911. These figures, and I think C.D. Howe, who would later become known as the Minister of Everything, played a role in this. They educated King very nicely to understand that you needed to nationalize the bank, which he did, to make it an instrument for government, which he did, although unfortunately assets of the British Empire were installed as governors who didn't allow it to ever, not once, be used properly, except during World War II, as an instrument like a Hamiltonian national bank, the way I believe it was intended to be. It did emit victory bonds, and that was sort of an echo of what it was supposed to do even in peacetime, but it was never permitted to do that. So they did some good fights. They nationalized the bank, and they brought in the Four Pillars. The Four Pillars basically separated the four aspects of banking from having trusts, insurance, commercial banking, investment banking as separate quarantined aspects of the economy. And you couldn't do insurance as a bank if you also wanted to do commercial banking. You couldn't. You had to be a separate entity. And only the clean commercial banks received government, like what's known as the Canadian insurance, Canadian taxpayer, based insurance, which is what we have today, which is part of the creation of confidence. Now, because it was separated, then the economic activity more generally within the society from 1946, 47 onward was associated with activities that were clean generally, that were associated with productivity that was measurable generally, And
Mhm.
I'm saying generally a lot because there were loopholes
Yeah.
created to allow them to get around that. But overall, that was the paradigm as it was in the US and in Europe. And this is what was destroyed in 1971 when the US dollar was taken off the fixed exchange rate. And so too was it done similarly. We were affected in Canada under similar ways where we became speculative, commercial, consumerist instead of productive. And as you said, in the case of Canada, the four pillars were destroyed under Mulroney in 1986.
Why? What was the excuse to take them down? Deregulation?
Well, yeah, part of Thatcherism and part of Reaganomics. So the Austrian school was brought in under Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman. It was brought in as the new governing mechanism that justified the stripping of nations from their rights to have any say in economic affairs. That's why Milton Friedman and von Hayek were given Nobel Prizes to legitimize their theories as members of the Austrian school.
And you say they're very destructive to economies. These sort of these economic schools. You look
We
at
privatized everything. That's that what they did was what Reagan called for, which was a total, like the creation of universal banking. And in the case of Mulroney, it was deregulate everything, allow the markets to determine our destiny. That's exactly what he did. He privatized a shit ton of things that had formerly been under public control in Canada. And he created what's known as universal banking right a few months after Margaret Thatcher had done it first in 1986 under what's known as the Big Bang. She called it the Big Bang, or it was called the Big Bang in London first, because it was a total elimination of national regulation of the banks. And the idea that you could have universal one-stop banks that could do all of these things, being serving as trusts, insurance.
Convenience to the consumer again, you know?
Yeah, it was a euphemism, but it was always a trap.
Yes.
So they did it in England. It was so big and celebrated as a glory that it was done in Canada same year. And this also created a precedent around which the later NAFTA could be introduced as something.
Mulroney as well.
Yeah, Mulroney did all the heavy lifting. It was
He
Jean
did
Chrétien signed off on it, but
Yeah.
Mulroney did the work, and Reagan and Bush Sr. did the work in the U.S. side. And
when was Glass-Steagall repealed? 1999 or what?
Yeah, 1999. And that was the
did
very
that?
last act by Bill Clinton.
Clinton. Okay.
Yeah, very last thing he did before he left the White House was repeal Glass-Steagall. And then you had the deregulation of over-the-counter derivatives just a little bit after that, right before 9/11. And with those two things, the repeal of Glass-Steagall and the deregulation of over-the-counter derivatives, you had the total. Well, if people have watched The Inside Job, the documentary that even went across Canadian cinemas in 1998, it was a good documentary, and it went through how this deregulation happened very concretely, and it was good. The Big Short was another documentary, but that was done more as a movie, but same story. Also in theaters, very good, very good film. Yeah. For those who want to just get a very quick thumbnail sketch introduction to the essence of it, those are two good things to watch. And it basically turned what was $75 trillion of derivatives in 1999 into $790 trillion of derivatives in 2007, which were then blown up under the very controlled, foreseeable housing market bubble that was blown up. And again, another wealth transfer, but then it was never resolved. It could have been resolved. There was even a bill in Congress to restore Glass-Steagall in 1998. I think John Conyers.
98 or in
98, 1998. Okay. Sorry, 2008. Sorry.
I was going to say, I just
Yeah, 2008. Sorry. It was rejected, and instead what we saw was the Dodd-Frank Act, which gave basically it was protection for the derivatives bubble that became law. And it also introduced the bail-in regime in 2012. So the Dodd-Frank Act first, before it was done in Canada, introduced, I forget which section of this giant, like 13,000 page regulation, which didn't regulate anything. It allowed for banks to then, in a time of crisis, steal people's deposits and convert them into bank equity in a time of crisis. So that was already done in the US. And then Justin Trudeau, when he came into power in 2016, said, well, it's done in the US. We should do it here. And he did. And then that became, and this was Mark Carney actually put back when Mark Carney was still the governor of the Bank of Canada, and then he went and became the governor of the Bank of England. He put this program into legal sort of wording that was then acted upon by Justin Trudeau, which allowed for Canadian banks in a time of crisis, which is, again, very foreseeable if you're the people creating the crisis, to steal people's savings and deposits and transform them through, convertible loans and other things into bank equity to keep the banks from collapsing. So it's called a bail-in instead of a bail-out. Either way, you're stealing from the people. So
yeah,
that
let's
was
be clear.
that was done. Huh?
That's exactly what they've been doing for all this time. And I wonder, like, I really felt 2007-8 myself and my family, because my late husband and I had bought a GM dealership, started off, come to a new community. I'm pregnant. We got a few little kids. It's running well for a few years. And then bang, just as we're getting started, this whole crisis and GM's going bankrupt. And there were a lot of dealers that committed suicide. It was awful. We had to remortgage our home. Had we not sold the dealership at a loss, we would have been in horrific financial straits for being an entrepreneur. I mean, and this is the story of a lot of people in that time. And I'm fortunate that I had my own company and could rebuild, but it destroyed my husband's health, that loss of his dream, and ended up destroying his life. Very tragic. So I felt the pain of what they did to my family personally. And it's one of the reasons I'd like to run to make sure that doesn't happen again. And still, we've not learned the lessons, as you say. We have to. We're building again to a crisis level with spending. You look back to what Trump is revealing with this wasteful spending. Why can't we reinstate the 4 pillars, Matthew, and get our national banking back on track? It seems like an obvious solution.
Yeah, it's like one of these questions, right? Like Canada, the best of Canada, in my assessment, and as you know, I've written a series of books to try to organize my thoughts and discoveries about the hidden Canada around what's called the untold history of Canada. And
excellent book, by the way, for anyone. And I say grab it on Amazon, because it's such an important read. And thank you for doing that, Matthew.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that's just it's a 4-volume book series, right? So it's volume 1, 2, 3, and 4 of just that, to try to help me understand, because I was a political activist at the time that I was writing that, trying to understand, what am I operating within? What is this thing called Canada that I'm operating within? And I was trying to deal with certain paradoxes, and in terms of my effort to answer them and resolve the paradoxes, it had me discover a whole different story about what is actually controlling Canada. And I had to drink the bitter medicine, which I did, and it was tough. I get it, but we're not a real country. I'll just say it straight. We're not a real country. We're a fake country. Most of what we think of as Canada is a synthetic construct promoted through the assistance of hypnotic induction and myth making to make us think that we're a thing. For the most part, we're not. The best times where we did grow, as I inferred a couple of those moments, were periods where we had the assistance, support, and collaboration of genuine, authentic Republicans, mostly in the United States, though sometimes also in France, like Charles de Gaulle, who gave us the type of support politically that was needed for patriots to be able to override the agenda of the Privy Council, the Privy Council office, the lieutenant governors, the governor general, and the entire deep state centralized command and control center, which has sort of always been there and baked into our Constitution, the BNA Act of 1867. It's sort of always there as the driving force, even more powerful than the House of the Commoners, as they called it, the House of Commons for the commoners. It's disgusting that we allowed it to be called that. But so we had either John F. Kennedy, we had a Franklin Roosevelt, we had the allies of Lincoln, McKinley, who were able to provide support to patriots in Canada to do good things, as Wilfrid Laurier discovered when he had good people to work with surrounding William McKinley, who was later assassinated as president of the United States. But without that Republican support, I don't see any of that goodness having any possibility of having existed in the first place or not being subverted. So that's one factor that is an uncomfortable truth, but one that I believe is a truth. And I think I prove it pretty concretely in my 4 volumes of the Untold History of Canada. So as far as today, like what's stopping us is the highly centralized control of Ottawa through the City of London directed Privy Council and Privy Council Office, which are 2 separate things but interconnected. The Privy Council is about a 400-person committee under the King of England, King Charles III, who oversees that. He was inducted in 2014, and he's largely the leader of the Canadian Privy Council. There's one in Australia too. Members from the treacherous private sector as well as members from the public sector are all initiated into this thing that forces members to keep secret that which would be given in council and secret in Privy Council by law. And people can just listen. Google. I challenge people who might be confused. Google Justin Trudeau, oath of Privy Council, oath of office. Just Google that. Listen to what Justin Trudeau has to say, as does every single prime minister and shadow cabinet minister. Every single one since 1867 has to give the same pledge of allegiance to the hereditary powers of England into perpetuity.
Well, can't we break that up? I mean, like,
yeah, sure.
I mean, I'm,
Sure.
I love, the flag, whatever you want to think about the flag, the country itself, the land is spectacular. And look at how we inspired the world with our Freedom Convoy. There's glimmers of hope, in different pockets. We have all these resources. You look at the model with Libya, where Gaddafi, through just oil alone, was able to create nationalizing oil, this incredibly rich country, and also do so much good for people, free education, free this. I mean, lift people out of poverty into wealth just through their resources instead of allowing globalist companies to rape and pillage them. I mean, why can't we, through a referendum or some sort of initiatives helped by the US, get out of the influence of the crown?
Well, this is where I think that you need, that's why I alluded to the fact that anything good that I've ever found as far as genuine, authentic leaps into progress, which always happened with a fight against an anti-humanist machinery within the provinces and within the federal government, always happened with the support of patriots who had attained political power in either the USA and or France. France, just because that's part of Quebec. Eastern Canada is big part of that is New France, Quebec, which has a deep, Colbertist tradition that's been perhaps beaten out of so many of us here. I live in Quebec. Even the patriots of Quebec have been detached from this history and tradition, unfortunately, but it's there. There's a latent subconscious memory that can be acted upon, and which Charles de Gaulle did a good job acting upon when his time came. Today, I think the problem is that. Oh, sorry, what?
No, you go ahead. I was going to talk about the seeds of patriotism, so don't let me forget my thought. Okay. Go ahead. Finish yours.
Okay. So I think that today, I always refer to intention in my discourses for a reason, because legally speaking, if you are somebody who is intellectually broken, and I know many good Canadians with good hearts are intellectually, the heart and the intellect are not the same thing, though they are connected. but the intellect is so misshapen by a legalistic mode of conditioning through our education system and various cultural traps to get us to think that reality is shaped by mathematics, by formulas, by rules, by legalisms, which, if you are a freedom lover, you might be demoralized because baked within the Canadian legal structure, while there are loopholes, free man on the land movement members discovered some of these loopholes. They're simply loopholes that are designed to be loopholes built in since the Magna Carta of 1215 in order, by intention, for a landed aristocracy to be above the law. Now, good people with some intelligence can capitalize at different times on those loopholes and avoid paying taxes. That's true. We can do those things. And I've seen examples. It's true. But that's not why they exist. That's not our freedom. Our freedom is not to be able to avoid the system and to get away from driving with a driver's license if maybe we really memorize the loopholes really well. That's still not the basis upon which we can fight this oligarchy, which has been around for thousands of years and is committed to killing off 95% of the world population. You can't fight it that way. Canada is not a country. It's a synthetic thing. It's a shell without the legal parameters needed to enforce, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, the type of revolutionary political economic overhaul needed to make us independent without a fight. I don't see that. However, not to be demoralized by what I just said, the fact that the US has expressed an intention to disrupt those oligarchical, British imperially directed City of London systems of control over Canada is interesting, and it creates a space culturally by which a new intention that could be well organized by patriots could emerge if done well.
If done well, and I agree. And
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I see like this, maybe you want to say it's fake patriotism that's just materialized since Trump's been pushing the 51st state stuff. That, you know, you've told me even before that a lot of what Canadians, sort of the mainstream Canadians, identify as Canada is just not being the Americans. So this bad behavior, booing the U.S. national anthem, and then now all of a sudden putting up flags. Forget, you know, you could call the Freedom Convoy all sorts of despicable names, or, you know, all the things that we've witnessed over the years. But as soon as Trump says something, let's get patriotic, you know. But the thing about that is it does open the space up for a conversation, and we aren't very educated on what's been happening to the country at all. There's been no accountability. If there were a mass education as to what's been happening to people, to their health, to their money, to their freedoms, to name three, maybe there would be an opening to get rid of some of the shackles that have been imprisoning us, like the Privy Council and the relationship to Britain that we don't need, that's never served us for any good intention, but to be part of what you call the great game to hold the US at bay, and even being sort of the launch pad for some of the assassinations that have happened throughout history in the training ground. So, I mean, we don't have the education. We don't have the media. These are weaponized tools to keep us in ignorance and in dark. And maybe shining the light, a big, big fat light like Trump's doing, might actually be the impetus that is that wake-up call over time. I'm hopeful.
Me too. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm choosing currently. I've got three so people. I mentioned my two extremes of like the uber pro-Trump hopium addicts who are like ultra QAnon. Mm-hmm. They're like, we've won the world. We can stop. Like, just eat the popcorn. He's the Messiah. Like, I interact with these people, and some of these people are my friends, and I respect them, and they respect me, and that's cool. But I don't think they're right, and I think they're actually blinding themselves. They will intellectually do mentally weird gymnastics to justify things that are unjustifiable in my mind.
Right. And then there's the other, like super black pill, Trump's the horrible guy, and even all these doing all these great things.
Yeah, they'll
That's
ignore all of the good
almost
things,
worse.
and they'll just look at all of the bad things about Roy. He's a disciple of, he's tied to Roy Cohn, the Mayor Lansky operative, and they'll point out all the bad things.
Well, yeah,
And-
there are a number of his appointments that are controversial. Marco Rubio, even Pam Bondi. I mean,
Even look, honestly, Pete Hegseth. Like, honestly, the guy has the Kingdom of Jerusalem tattoo on his chest.
I saw
and has given direct speeches in the need to reconstruct Solomon's temple, which is part of this oligarchical, like there's this crazy Solomon temple revival cult thing of Greater Israel, which there are certain people who've been indoctrinated over centuries to believe that the end times will happen when you build Solomon's temple for the third time, because it's been destroyed twice. And then at that peak, you'll have Greater Israel expand according to some promised covenant God made 6,000 years ago or whatever.
Let's I mean, that's a whole topic unto
itself. That's a whole thing unto itself. But all I have to say, like Pete Hegseth, I don't trust him because he's given speeches on that. He's tattooed this restoration of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which is part of the Crusades. Like now the thing is
concerning, but he did say that the U.S. would get out of Ukraine. So let's just look at the actions, or that was a positive action.
I want to look at both those things because, like, I believe that it's good to get out of Ukraine. However, in play right now, I'll give a warning. There is a scenario being put in place currently which believes that it's possible to pull Russia to create a time machine. I'll say it that way. They want to create a time machine to go back to 2003 when Vladimir Putin was still willing and Russia was still very weak to join NATO and to be part of an Anglo-Russian special relationship to conquer the world. That was something Putin was willing to do in 2002, 2003. By 2007, with the Munich Security Conference speech, he made it very clear that he was aware that the thing that controls the U.S. under Bush and Cheney and then Obama was not interested in any collaboration. They were only interested in total, like, global imperial dominance and the destruction of Russia and China. And he said this in the Munich Security Conference speech, which is a great speech to watch. I've rewatched it and rewatched it. It's so useful.
Really? Like, is there a link that you can send me?
It's on YouTube. I'll send you a copy of it. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Excellent.
Putin did a great job. And he called out the bullshitters. But still today, you have people like John Mearsheimer amongst some sort of more reasonable, for those listening to our show right now, I'm doing air quotes with my fingers, more reasonable neocons who believe that the US and Russia should be able to team up against China to destroy China and have a one world government together. Some of those influences I see around Trump. I don't think Trump is like that. However, that's a part of the various dynamics in play as strategies, which we've seen also with, Keith Kellogg gave us an interview where he said one of the mandates or objectives of the new U.S. agenda or strategy towards Russia is to loosen it away from the multipolar alliance of its relations with Iran and with China and with India. They want to loosen it up by giving it certain offerings as sacrifice. In this case, it would be Ukraine. But with the expected return that Russia would no longer perhaps honor certain agreements that it had with Iran, India, and China. It did certain things with India on oil, saying, and this is where I think that they're not too smart, because when Modi met with Trump, I think Trump really does honestly want to have good relations with Modi. But there was also the idea that the U.S. would replace Russia in providing natural gas to India, which India wants to double its natural gas use by 2030. So part of the message being put onto Modi, Narendra Modi, was it's going to come from the U.S., not from Russia, as we did to Europe after we blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. We're like, well, you're not going to get that natural gas from Russia, so you're going to pay 4 times more from us, whether you like it or not. We told that to Europe, and now they're trying to do that to India. Whether or not India, I don't know if they have the sovereign power to resist. I have no idea.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's so many nuances, and I mean, obviously, you know, some of the people that have been nominated. I mean, I'm really a fan of Robert Kennedy Jr. overall, and he's got quite a bit of negative flack, but he's taking really quite bold steps, given still the level of willful blindness around gross corruption within big pharma. And so I think it's a very exciting for our health, because I want to return to this whole message of health, because it doesn't really matter what's happened in the past. It sounds sort of strange to say to a historian, because you can always, with proper seeds, you can plant this sort of patriotic action and knowledge, but you need to be physically healthy, mentally healthy. Those things are missing, horrifically missing, both in the States and Canada and a lot of Western countries, because we've been poisoned deliberately with our food and with our with our schools, everything, even our soils. If you look into the background of biosolids, I presented on that, the way they're contaminating the soils. And so this is a huge job for us to lift out the poisons. And then I think better ideas will flourish, and these seeds of sovereignty, because when you don't have any physical energy, you're not going to fight for your family or country. You're just going to, grab a donut and slap on a TV show, because you just don't even have it in you. So I think we have a big job to clean up our countries, our minds, our bodies, and then I think we can see really good stuff. It's whether people have the will to clean it up or themselves up first is always the big question. But I want to ask you about this whole tariff thing to end up, and Tom Holman is saying Canadian border is a disaster for drugs. I mean, talking about physical health, we're killing kids in, I don't know, hundreds of thousands with fentanyl. And it seems like Canadians hardly even bat an eye about the horrific deaths. And even if you're walking down the street in Vancouver, you see addicts everywhere, and yet they're concerned about tariffs, and they're not even concerned about carbon taxes. So it's a pretty sad time for awake patriots to watch this. What's your comments on, what the next few months could look like for Canada with tariffs and all this stuff happening at our borders, and why that we aren't just doing the practical thing? The U.S. is our biggest customer. I ran a talent solutions firm, and if my biggest customer told me I need to fix something for a relationship, I'd be fixing it, because I don't want to lose them. I don't make it tougher to do business with them. So what's your comments on all of that stuff? More practical questions, current times.
Well, the tariff thing should be seen as a blessing. I think it's a blessing in my mind, because to be a true sovereign country, you have, again, it comes down to intention. You have to be animated by the intention to care for the people who make up the sovereign country. And the people who make up the sovereign country have to be able to look in the mirror and see that they are the government. And they have confirmation by that fact, because the government that they elected and represented and participated in also is making decisions on the global playing field that takes care of their interests as primary to every other consideration, which means that we have to be looking for avoiding war, looking for good deals with our neighbors, and looking for things that don't just benefit a private financial cartel of billionaires, but all people.
Yes. Win-win.
So, yeah, in a genuine, authentic sense. So, we're in a state where we've been betrayed for so long, and we need to regain an authentic faith in the nation state. The oligarchy doesn't want us to have any faith in the nation state because they want us to either accept one world government because nation states are too short-sighted and corrupt, or they want us to go anarchistically localized and communalistically like myopic, that we become more controlled against our own will. They are happy if we all go anarchist and don't
Yes.
think about the greater whole. So they want both. Either one of those two reactions to the corruption of the system are perfectly satisfying for the oligarchy that exists. Now, we're in a place where we're living right now in a systemic breakdown crisis. We have a small window of opportunity to change our paradigm, to change our thinking in a clear-headed way, which we won't have many of these things left. After this window closes, I don't know if we're gonna have another window. This might be the last one.
But
If we
that's not-
fail,
go ahead.
I'm just saying, if we fail now to change our thinking, to act accordingly, we might go into a prolonged dark age, which means the elimination of about 90% at least of the human lives currently alive on the face of the earth will be eliminated, and whole moral intellectual traditions will be forgotten in the course of a plunge into a multi-centennial dark age, which will potentially, if this happens, condemn our children and grandchildren to a life of hell on earth.
Well, I don't
Often,
buy that. I can't even see it. I mean,
I
not
can't accept
only
it, but I'm saying it because it's a real possibility. If we don't get our heads out of our asses to act accordingly, if we don't, I don't want to paint like
we're being
pretend that that's not a
forced.
real possibility.
We're being forced to get our heads out of our asses, I believe. And the
Yeah.
thing is that you've talked about this a number of times. What's missing, when FDR realized that the banksters were raping and pillaging the people, there was accountability. People went to jail, and
Yep.
then there was reform. So it's simple. We need first, and we haven't had this 7, 8 bailouts. We haven't had accountability. People need to go to
Okay.
jail,
Yeah.
not just for the banksters, but for COVID. There needs to be accountability,
So
and then reform.
This is why I think that there's so much effort right now to weaponize Canadians with narratives that get them to become very emotional about the evil China CPC. It's big right now, full spectrum.
I just want to focus on Canada because
I know. I'm just saying it right
think
now because China in the last 10 years, since 2012, have put 4.7 million members of the Chinese Communist Party, have punished them with many have been put into serious jail sentences. Members of Interpol, the Chinese intelligence apparatus, the former minister of China of so-called justice. These are, as I've looked at, assets of the World Economic Forum and the Western oligarchy that has built a deep state in China. They've actually done a very effective job over especially 10 years to shut that whole thing down. They banned George Soros in 1989. They banned him, shut down all of his assets. They've been like targeting all of these agents, these traders who have been forced to go to Canada mostly in waves, 3 dominant waves in 1989, 1997, right before Hong Kong was returned to China from the British Empire, which was the center of the global triads. And then after 2012, we have 3 waves of infusions of Chinese multi-billionaire oligarchical traders who avoided jail in China by coming to Canada, where they were given safe haven to be part of the Meyer Lansky Jewish Italian mafia crime syndicates, laundering drug money on behalf of the British Empire. And what's happening, as far as I could see right now, which is the greatest threat that I see to Canadian patriots, is that they're so soft-minded that they're believing in the narratives being put forth by people like Sam Cooper and by people like Green Beret operatives who are being brought onto Tucker Carlson to redirect all of their hate and anger.
You've frozen up there
For the oncoming war against China and Russia that's happening right now as we speak,
Yeah.
which is only going to happen with the consent of Canadian idiots, which are believing in this garbage and which is avoiding the role of the City of London controls, which have been on top of dominating global narcotics trade through the HSBC, Toronto Dominion, Scotiabank, BMO, Royal Bank of Canada operations, which have been behind global Mexican, Latin American, KMT, Taiwan, Triad, Hong Kong drug flows since 1946 and even earlier, often operating through British-controlled Freemasonic agencies. All of these very discoverable institutions that have been ingrained in our society for multiple generations are being deflected by people like Sam Cooper and others who are weaponizing good-hearted Canadians to prepare to acquiesce to go to war with China, which is actually successfully putting their traitors in jail, their deep state in jail, which we should be learning from to do the same thing, but we're not.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm saying it with a bit of emotion in my voice.
Yes,
Because,
I know. And
it saddens
people,
me.
I know, and I people do resist that, and I mean, I'm sure I'll get comments just for you saying that, but I think it's true that our enemy is not from without, it's from within. And I think what we need to do is clean up our own criminality. And, we don't have, as you said, unfortunately, even all these senators that were just appointed by Trudeau, left-leaning, liberal-minded senators, are even our police officers won't arrest someone at a protest unless they're, Canadian patriots. So it's a really tall order. It can get demoralizing and depressing, but I personally believe we're making progress, or there wasn't this fight. As you say, it is a fight, but we are making progress, and we have to keep our eye on what we're supposed to do is clean up our own country. And, as you've said, and I don't want to go into this too much more, but China's really has never invaded another country, and people have to start looking at the Chinese psyop. Sure, there's a deep state element probably still within China. It's a very big country. It can economically crush us, but the solutions are always within. Strong banking system, rebuild our industrial capacity and our innovation, get the wokeness and the DEI out of our learning institutions so that critical thinking can flourish and an exchange of ideas. Even all of these medical journals have been paid and weaponized. And that does influence us. But I think we have some heavy lifting being done by American patriots, which is I'm very thankful for. And I feel like I thank God that there are all these American patriots, including Trump, that are doing these big wake-up calls. And as you said, we could go on and on. The world is starting to listening. So I believe we are at a turning point, and it doesn't mean you can sit there silent. I mean, taking responsibility, it's an action word. You got to get involved in the process. You can't let 2 or 3 people do the heavy lifting. So we need people in large numbers to squash all of these things like the climate agenda, the all of the medical tyranny going on, all of the problems with upholding the law. You speak out on all of these gender ideologies that are harming our kids. I mean, and so on, and grow a backbone and get involved. Whether you're supporting party X or Y, you should be voting actually for the person in your riding that best represents your values. And we, getting to the person of integrity who has the best intentions, maybe the knowledge for their community is shown through action, that they care and that they want the best for their community. I mean, all these things could happen in the future, but without people understanding what's happening, I can't see it happening. While our media is still weaponized and people don't listen to the states, and people still don't even listen to alternative media very much. So final thoughts, because we have covered a lot. We've covered like such a range of topics, and it's always so interesting to talk to you, Matt. Thank you so much. What would you say to the listeners? We have quite a few people listening who obviously are Canadian patriots who care about this country, and what advice would you give them over the next few months? You did say that if we don't get the banking system right, we're forked. how can we get the banking system right? And what can we do? What is the most important things for us to do individually and collectively to improve the lives of people in this country we call Canada?
Well, look, the banking system that's been animating our society since 1971 has been designed to blow up like a time bomb. That's the purpose of the, what is it now? I think last time I checked on it, it was about 700 to 800 trillion dollar global derivatives time bomb. That's about 10 times at least more than the world measurable GDP, which includes drugs, by the way, drug profits and drug trade monies. So the GDP is not even a reliable metric. It's very detached from the physical economy and the physical reality of what has real value. Unlike the case before you and I were even born, right, in the 60s and 70s, where there was more of a sense that there was a physical reality that had to justify the behavior of money, its behavior, its quantity and flow. And if we're going to survive, we have to have a paradigm that recognizes the reality that money is a servant of the needs of the people, and the needs of the people is tied to the metaphysical reality of our mind's power to love our neighbor, to think of the future, to discover new realities based on science and technology, to leap over the limits to growth. And if those realities are not there, we're not fit to survive. We've lost the moral fitness to survive if we forget that. So I think that right now, the prospect of a restoration of protective tariffs should be seen not as a problem, but as an opportunity, because like currently the administration of Canada, which will soon be run by Mark Carney, who's a vicious creature, a vicious, more dangerous creature than anything people imagined Justin Trudeau could ever be. Mark Carney is so much worse.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Awful. Well, I'm hoping he'll never get to
you-
lead because pictures are being circulated with Giselle Maxwell and
I know,
Epstein.
but don't get your hopes up. So Mark Carney is a vicious eco warrior central banker who is highly initiated, highly competent, very competent at being evil.
Yes.
And he's committed to global, like Maurice Strong population reduction. Like he's really committed to that. Now, people like him would utilize protective tariffs for the purpose of perhaps maybe revenge against the US, but not for the protective tariffs exist for the purpose of encouraging the development of a nation's manufacturing and agriculture. That's why it exists. To defend against the dumping of cheap goods from overseas. That's why it exists. That's the only legitimate purpose. As an intention, again, I say this intention a lot because people don't understand properly, in my assessment, the power of intention, both in themselves as individuals, but also as the animating force of all of human existence or the universe as a whole. The universe is animated.
Agree.
Right. So I'm saying this not for you, but for those who might be watching who are a little philosophically maybe confused. Intention is everything.
Oh, that can't be understated as well.
Yeah.
The way that we can.
Anybody
And
who's
that's
been
why I
through
believe.
depression and who came out of depression, I noticed that the core thing that allows them to overcome depression or an addiction that's killing them is intention. They had a sense that they no longer intended to be on that path and began to use that intention to activate their reasonable imagination to actualize in their mind's eye futures that became their guiding light of the better self they wanted to become, that allow them to overcome the whether seductions or the
temptation of
temptations
yeah.
or the threats or anything else. That's what gave them the strength as individuals, but we also see that throughout humanity as being what creates good conspiracies is people, often not very many, but a few who became who went through the fire and organized themselves to become committed to living for something more than themselves, whether it's Martin Luther King Jr. or John F. Kennedy or Enrico Mattei of Italy, who also got assassinated, or Patrice Lumumba or whomever. They were never isolated individuals on an island out in a vacuum. They were always part of a cultural dynamic, and they happened to be the ones who were perhaps the most pronounced within the fight, but they were never alone. They always emerged within a cultural movement, a dynamic, a conspiracy to the good against the conspiracies towards evil. Now, the oligarchy is very good at organizing conspiracies around a principle of evil and anti-natural law. They're very good at doing that. They're very good at subterfuge, at lies. They're very sophisticated at it. It saddens me. It saddens me how good they are at being evil and have maintained that over time.
Well, we have to have the similar intention on the good side. We have to become so good at being good. And it's all, about, really, you're talking about elevating human consciousness, because getting out of our selfish living, lower level ego, jealousy, anger, hate, greed, and living for something bigger is all about ascending. So we're more selfless, and that's when you can step into willingness and courage. And
that's the only
reason,
time you could say you could only be said to have free will at that moment when you're willing to die for something true and bigger than yourself. At that point, your decisions can be said to be free. To the degree that you're more afraid of your mortality or discomfort, or loss of whatever prestige associated with your ego, to the degree that those are fears, you're not free. Your decisions will always be confined by factors that are beyond your will and will make you ultimately an instrument for the destruction of yourself and the people that you're a part of, even if you're not a bad person. So I've noticed that when I look at when I've examined the identities of what formulates a John F. Kennedy versus, Lyndon Johnson, is that attribute, or let's say a W.A.C. Bennett or a Daniel Johnson Sr., if you're a Canadian. These are people who I believe should be really our role models. And they went through the fire of their personal fears and their sense of fear of death, to be willing to really face the monster,
and fight the monster,
and fight it properly, right, and wisely, not just run into the fire, which so many are more willing to run in. Like Plato in his dialogues, he gets at the folly of those who just have courage but no wisdom versus those who have wisdom and courage, and whose courage is animated by wisdom. It's very different, and many people are willing to die without wisdom but with courage stupidly, versus those who are able to think strategically and yet still be willing to die, but not for stupid reasons. And the oligarchy wants us to go into the cult of St. Michael to fight the dragon. This is and to ultimately allow ourselves. Here's the thing. I'm going to just say this right now.
This is our final.
No, this is important.
This is interesting
because it's such a governing mechanism of all human civilization. The oligarchy was able to achieve the Crusades to get good people to become the instruments of their own self-destruction for centuries in the Middle Ages, starting in 1098, by getting them to become egotistical, virtue signaling egos that would see other people with other religions and other faiths as being lesser than themselves, and thus liable to be attacked because they are evil, because they're not the particular brand of Christianity that they happen to be. And they became the crusaders that ran headfirst into the fires of religious wars, on the financing of oligarchs who are Satanists, who are acting like Christians, but were happy to watch Christians killing themselves to create forever wars between neighboring societies. And things like we see the imagery of the cult of the Archangel Michael, of Saint Archangel Michael killing the dragon. This is what John Quincy Adams warned about in 1821 when he said we must never go off looking for monsters to destroy. He was directly aware of this potential fanatical folly within his own American people when he was president, that could see that they could become enmeshed in wars that would ultimately lead to their own self-destruction. And today, unfortunately, I do honestly see a revival of this egotistical fanaticism, while I also see the good thing. There's also a good potential, like a good revival, as we've noted with the castration of the U.S. aid, the attempt to create a positive set of relations between the USA, Russia, and its neighbors to avoid World War III, the shutdown of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA front group designed to overthrow governments we don't like. And those are good things.
Really
but then
good.
There's this other thing, which
Right.
is also that we cannot lose sight of. So the way I see Trump is like a pragmatic patriot. That's the way I see him right now. Whether I'm wrong or not remains for the future to be seen. But the way I see him right now is something we as Canadians, especially Albertans and Saskatchewans, especially there. And I say especially because I think that the most pragmatic activation of real active political policy making that could favor this agenda is in Alberta, and number 2, Saskatchewan, and elsewhere afterwards. That's the crack in the system. If we can get the real fight to harmonize with a pro-industrial, pro-growth, anti-imperial USA, it'll happen in Alberta first. After which point it can happen elsewhere. That's the way I see it. And
that would be amazing for Canada in the future if that could be achieved. And we should all set our intentions for that through all our actions every day.
Now, here's the thing I'll throw out there, and I don't want to speak over you. I'm so sorry, but I just really want to get this across. I go to Calgary frequently, as does Cynthia. We go to Calgary frequently. We speak to audiences there. Many of those audience members that we speak to are politically engaged in the provincial Conservative Party under Danielle Smith. Many of them are. They've even organized a major conference on this March, in the opening, I think it's March 3rd, an injection of truth, and it's going to have Daniel. It's going to have a number of leading figures. David Martin is going to be there speaking.
I'd like to go. Can I go out to that, or can you send me something afterwards?
Yeah, you and I will talk. So the thing, though, is that I've noticed is that they do these highly potent interventions. They're being endorsed by the provincial Conservative Party, and I've asked them, because I'm in Quebec. But I've asked them, like, are you guys talking to the Quebec Conservatives? They're like, no, we don't talk to them. I'm like, oh, that's sad. Are you talking to the Ontario Conservatives? Are you talking to the BC Conservatives? They're like, no, we have no communication. So
they should be talking to, PPCers across Canada.
And that's the same thing. So I have my buddy in Vancouver who's a PPC candidate, Payman Ascari.
Oh, Payman's a great guy. Yeah, hi, Payman.
Yeah, he's super nice. I've been on the show. I like him a lot. Yeah. He's cool. And yet I asked him, like, hey, are you guys like working with the PPC of BC to support or to collaborate with or to strategize with these groups in BC, in Alberta? And he's like, no, I didn't even know that that's happening. I'm like, whoa. Well, now Payman is going to be interviewing my buddy soon, who's a key organizer in that conference I just referenced, the injection.
I think I interviewed him as well.
Yes, you did, and you did too.
I forgot his name. What's his name again? Because
Mike Holmes.
Mike and I. He's been on my show.
Yeah. He's been on. And
I live streamed the last one, and we had like over 1,000 viewers. So
that's fucking cool, man.
Yeah.
Right? So like,
please connect me, because I would love to fly out if I could somehow participate. And I do think we need to have discussions, people who get it, whether you're, CPC or PBC or your freedom movement, you don't believe in any, or whatever you believe in. We should have these civil discussions without attacking each other, because it's not productive.
No, it's not, right? So that's the way I see it. Like right now, we need to get all freedom people, whether it's like PPC or provincial conservative groups, whatever. We got to coordinate and like harmonize our strategy
I
to
mean,
get an effect. Because if we don't do that and we're all left, and I've noticed that in talking to even amongst the Alberta conservatives, there's Alberta conservative groups who are awesome, but who don't know what the other is doing in Alberta. How much worse is that for Canada?
I think so. I mean, I'm really focused. It's such a huge job to win a seat against all odds and make history in Canada, but that's my goal in the upcoming election. I'm not doing this. I want to win. That's the most benefit I'll have to the country. Just winning a seat as a patriot who stood on the right side of history, with all this truth being spewed out, like power spewed by Trump, I think is achievable for the PPC candidates that are really working hard. And so that's my goal, and I'm trying to be as regional as possible. But I also want to lift up anyone who's a patriot anywhere, who understands the threat of the neocon that is in Polyev. Warmongering Polyev, who's also still involved in the climate agenda. So we talked about Carney, but it's very hard to stand with any of the other leaders as well. They're totally kind of that uniparty alignment. And so the question is, what do we do, and how do we elect people who get it, not just federally, but provincially and locally in the future? And it just comes down to this massive education of the normies, and hopefully through Trump's efforts and the U.S. patriots, this massive education they're doing will sink in more and more. But anyways, I mean, I'd love to help out with that event. Certainly I'll live stream again, and I hope that we'll have you on again for another live stream. We had a really good audience tonight, and maybe we could take questions next time. We could do a live stream, because I think it's really helpful for everybody.
Yeah, okay. All right, anytime you want to, like, Tish, you inspire me. I love what you do. I love your identity, your personality. You've really honed yourself as an effective instrument, a weapon against empire, and you're one of the few who does this well. So I honestly, anytime you call upon me, I will be there for you, and I will happily participate in a discussion with yourself and with an audience if that is the decision of fate. So yes.
Wonderful. And he brought to mind something for April 6th. So hold that date. If you want something exciting, I'll tell you about that. I forgot. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody. Right. I'm going to end the live stream now. Talk soon.
Right.